All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everyone, let's begin. It's 2 o'clock. My name is Rob Altsmont, and I'll be your moderator for today's Hireko webinar titled The Basics of Ferrule Finishing. The webinar will be led by Hireko's Technical Director, Jeff Summit. Let me say a few words about Jeff's background first. He's worked in all facets of club making and repair since 1984 and has devoted the past 20 years to researching, testing, and analyzing thousands of different golf shafts. He has compiled his findings and research into the Dynamic Shaft Fitting Index, which is featured in the best-selling book, The Modern Guide to Club Making, and the Total Club Fitting in the 21st Century. Additionally, he has authored the annual Dynamic Shaft Fitting Addendum, which instructs club fitters in the proper fitting and selection of shafts. Both books are available for sale online at hirekogolf.com. Let me get a few housekeeping items out of the way first. Your audio settings are muted, which means we cannot hear you. And if you have any questions, use the question box located in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard. If for any reason you must leave the webinar, don't worry. It is being recorded and will be on youtube.com/HirekoGolf and on our blog in about 1 hour. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Hireko Golf's Technical Director, Jeff Summit. Take it away, Jeff.
Thank you, Rob, and thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Well, it's been a while since our last club making webinar, as many in the recent past have been devoted to club fitting. But to catch you up on speed, we're going to go on to possibly our next or even last step in the assembly process, which is ferrule finishing. You didn't just mishear what I said, because you have an option as a club maker. That's assuming that you're deciding to finish the ferrule at all, which sadly many don't. The question you're already probably asking is, why finish a ferrule in the first place? Well, I have one word for that: professionalism. You see, average golfers won't understand if the shaft is cut incorrectly, causing the club to be off by a quarter flex, or if the length is a quarter inch too short or too long, or if the swing weight's off by 2 points. No, but the average consumer can feel that there's an unevenness where the ferrule and the top of the hosel meet. It's the little things like that, like a fingerprint of epoxy on the shaft or the head, that in the end the customer is going to notice. Before I get to the point of finishing the ferrule, I want to first go over the purpose of the ferrule. Ferrules are simply those plastic trim pieces located above the hosel on the club head. Their main purpose is to provide a nice smooth transition from the hosel to the shaft. The majority of the ferrules that you see are black in color, but may have one or more colored trim rings on their upper or even lower end to provide a nice cosmetic aspect to a golf club. For many years, the outside diameter of a ferrule was typically larger than the average hosel. This required the club maker to turn down or sand the ferrule flush with the outside diameter of the hosel to provide that nice smooth transition. If not, you'd see or feel a noticeable lip like you see on the slide here. In the opposite case, where the ferrule is undersized or the base is smaller than the outside diameter of the hosel, this shows poor workmanship. This is why ferrules were produced with a larger outside diameter to accommodate as many clubs as possible. Unfortunately, many club makers find turning ferrules takes up valuable time, or they simply don't have the right equipment to do so. To eliminate the need for sanding the ferrules, they find it useful to start out with a ferrule that fits almost precisely and leave it as is. But first you have to realize that the hosels have tolerances too. The outside diameters are hand polished during the finishing process, so they will not always match outside diameter for outside diameter each and every time. This is the reason why turning down the ferrule is the most acceptable method. At Hireko, we actually have made your work easier by providing different size wood ferrules. Plus, we've standardized our hosel diameters with respect to product category. That is, all our irons, hybrids, and wedges have a hosel designed to be 13.6 millimeters or 535 thousandths of an inch in diameter. Our stainless steel fairway woods, the outside diameters are 12.2 millimeters or 48 thousandths of an inch. And lastly, on our titanium drivers, the outside diameters are 12.7 millimeters or ½ inch. This is why Hireko offers 2 different size wood ferrules. Otherwise, it would require you to remove 20 thousandths of an inch from the base of the ferrule to match the stainless steel fairways. Now, even though our ferrules will match closely to our heads, we still encourage you guys to finish the ferrules because the hosel may still have a slight tolerance and you'll never get a perfect fit. Plus, some ferrule installation tools can flare out the base of the ferrule when driving them on, so it's a good practice to turn or finish the ferrule. And when selecting which ferrules to use, the requirement to choose the type that's designed not only to fit the diameter of the shaft being used or the outside diameter of the head, but also to suit the design of the club head. It's customary to select the length of the ferrule based on the length of the hosel. For example, short ferrule looks more appropriate on a club head with a shorter hosel, while a longer ferrule is better suited to a more traditional long hosel club head. I'm going to tell you this from personal experience. A shorter ferrule is going to be easier to finish than a long one. Plus, a plain black ferrule is going to be easier to finish than one with any trim rings. So, when is it the best time to finish a ferrule? Well, the answer might depend upon your confidence or skill level as a club maker. Some club makers may perform this operation after the epoxy is set and before the club has been cut to length. Others elect to wait until the very end after they've gripped the club. The reasons for waiting until the end or before will vary. I was taught that any cleaning is done at the last minute before handing the club to the customer or putting a club in a box to be shipped. This is how it's often done on an assembly line. On the other hand, I think most of you will find finishing or partially finishing is done after the epoxy is set. The main reason is if during the ferrule finishing procedure you make a mistake, you'll have to take the club apart to put on a new ferrule. Therefore, it's best that it's done before you spend additional time gripping the clubs. Remember, the ferrules are usually force-fit onto the shaft, and it may require driving the butt end of the shaft onto the ground. If you do that with the grip on, then you can end up damaging the grip. The picture on this slide will show you a prime example of what can happen. Now, instead of one problem, now you have 2. The last thing you want to do is cut off a perfectly good grip, especially some of the grips costing $8. Yes, you could use a grip shooter, but using one to remove the grip requires additional time and resources. And remember that your time is your money. I'm going to go out on a limb here since you're attending today's webinar. I'm going to assume that you're going to take the time to finish your ferrules. Therefore, I'm going to commend all of you today for wanting to learn how to do it right. Now, I want to explain several ways to turn down or finish the ferrules because not everybody's going to have the same access to the same tools or the willingness to be adventuresome and use a belt sander. And the quickest way to finish the ferrules today, if you've done your homework and found a ferrule that matches most closely with the outside diameter of the hosel, is the acetone wipe. Acetone is a solvent that you can get at your local paint or hardware store. One thing about acetone is it will melt plastic. If there's only a small lip, then rubbing a paper towel or a clean rag soaked with acetone against the ferrule and the hosel is all you may need to do. You want to be careful to go along the entire circumference of the hosel. And the good thing about it, it only takes a couple seconds to do. Let me give you a few quick tips here. First, acetone evaporates very, very, very quickly. The acetone wipe method only works well if the paper towel or the clean rag is wet, not just damp. Now, if you have a dry towel, very little of the ferrule will melt and the finish will become faded or dull. With the towel soaked, not only will it melt the plastic, as is going to be evident by the black color on on the towel, but the acetone will also provide that nice, shiny finish. Also, you can rub the acetone soaked paper towel on the ferrule in either a circular motion or an up and down motion. If you look closely, you're going to be able to see what look like acetone lines. So do it one way or another, but not both if you're doing multiple clubs in a set. Again, make sure that the towel is moist during the step so you get a nice shiny ferrule and not a cloudy or have milky white streaks in it. And finishing the ferrule can be as easy as that. The other manual method of ferrule finishing involves several steps. This would be situations where you have a more sizable or a prominent lip than what an acetone wipe may be able to get done alone. Now, long gone are the days where the ferrules were much, much larger than the hosel. I remember teaching students the technique of using a flat file first to remove the bulk of the material. And this would be scary at first because you didn't want to damage the hosel on a metal wood or an iron. And in the case of the woods, you'd actually have to remove some of the wood. With ferrules more standardized in sizes along with hosels, you might have to remove some excess material, but that can usually be done with fine sandpaper. Now, first, you need to secure the shaft in a vise with your rubber shaft clamp, where you have plenty of room to work without interfering with the vise or any other obstructions. Next, you want to tape off the area around the hosel directly below the ferrule to protect it from getting accidentally sanded or marring the finish. Plus, it may not hurt to mask off the shaft as well, especially with today's shorter length ferrules. And the key is to create a smooth transition from the ferrule down to the hosel. So you want to start out by using a small 3/4 to inch wide strip of sandpaper. Now, I'd probably recommend 240 to maybe 320 grit. Otherwise, you're going to have more work in the next stages. When you go to sand, you want to do so uniformly around the entire diameter of the ferrule and the hosel. And my preferred method is the shoe shine method. And you can kind of see it in the slide here. And to ensure that you get it evenly, you want to periodically loosen the jaws of your vise and then rotate the shaft so you can carefully inspect it. Now, after the hand sanding is done with the sandpaper, you want to use a piece of triple-aught steel wool to remove any scratch marks left over. The finer the sandpaper that you use, the fewer scratches you're going to have. And this should only leave the surface with only a few minor scratches, making our last step easier to accomplish. And in this method, our final step is our acetone wipe, where we just wipe it down like I'd mentioned before. And remember to keep the towel moist so that you can maintain a nice, shiny, smooth ferrule. Now, for those who may want to speed up the process, you can use a belt sander equipped with a special belt to turn the ferrule. And before you run out and buy a belt sander, you probably want to listen up here first. When we talked in a previous webinar about abrading shafts, I mentioned the pros and cons of using a 1x30-inch belt sander versus a 1x42-inch belt sander. Here's another example why you want to probably invest in the larger 1x42. You see, most of the 1x30 inch belt sanders are cheap and readily available. And they're pretty much all the same, except they may have a different brand slapped on the side of them. The problem with using one of these for turning the ferrule is the belt speed. The 1x30-inch machines run at 3,450 RPMs, or revolutions per minute, which is great if you want to remove chrome off the steel shaft or grind the tip of the steel shaft for through-bore installation. But it's about twice the belt speed as most 1x42-inch belt sanders. And you can't use a rheostat to throttle the motor speed down either, because the small sanders are direct drive, so once you try to gear it down, it just simply stops. Plus, the higher the speed, the more material will come off and come off quickly. It's only going to magnify any mistakes that you made. Now, it's been several years ago when I worked for Dynacraft. I conducted an impromptu club making class for our distributor up in Canada. The class was held in the dead of winter in an old storage garage that housed mowing equipment. Our distributor was kind enough to bring some of the equipment so I didn't have to lug it across the border. Now, one of the tools at my disposal was, well, you guessed it, a 1x30-inch belt sander. And I was thinking to myself, what had I done to our distributor for him to punish me like that? I was so used to my trusty 1x42-inch belt sander that I'd used for years to turn down ferrules. Well, I went on and explained to all the attendees the pros and cons and gave them a spiel of why you should never use the smaller machine to turn the ferrules down. And I predicted that I'd probably burn up the ferrule, but proceeded to show them the proper technique anyway. Well, lo and behold, I think that was the very first time I ever used a 1x30-inch machine, and the ferrule turned out perfect. Well, I'll tell you from experience, it doesn't work that way, even if you do it in a day-in, day-out basis. In the club making school that I helped teach for years, we would set up the different size belt sanders and let the students go nuts on them. Even after closely mentoring them and demonstrating how it was done, well, let's put it this way. Turning a ferrule is not like riding a bike. This operation takes some skill, patience, and a lot of practice to perfect. I remember vividly that most students would go back to the hand sanding method, and you couldn't blame them because that was something they would do once they left to go back to their shop. And I'm pretty sure they felt more confident they weren't going to destroy the ferrule and have to start from scratch. But in each class, there are a few bold enough to try to see if they can do what the instructors made look so easy, which was finishing the ferrule in a matter of seconds. You can bet that there's a certain technique to do it right with either size machine you decide to use. Now, for starters, don't sand against the platen or that hard metal piece sticking from behind the belt. Rather, use the flexible portion located in the middle of the belt. Hireko sells a belt sander with a ferrule turning fixture in combination with a bench grinder so you can cut shafts, abrade them, and then turn down ferrules. And this helps to cut down on your workbench space. If you go out and purchase a commercially available belt sander, it's only going to sand. It's not going to be equipped with any of these features. Without a fixture, you can always try to hold the club freehand. However, I like to cheat and use a ferrule turning fixture to hold the shaft so it acts like an extra pair of hands. And of course, you can always make a homemade ferrule turning fixture for either type of belt sander with a little ingenuity. Just make sure to set it up to the proper height. And if you're going to be using the base plate of your belt sander, then you're going to need to remove the platen away. Now, to use the belt sander, you want to first install the special linen belt. Another name for it is a ferrule dressing belt. If you look for these belts in component catalogs, because that's the only place you're going to find them, there might be some different options. In Hireko's catalog, there's a white linen and a red Egyptian belt. The difference is the white linen is a little bit more aggressive and will take off more material quicker. Which one to use? Well, it's, again, based on your skill or confidence level. Once you turn on the belt sander, you want to start by positioning the club where the top of the hosel and the ferrule meet in the center of the belt. And once you're aligned, you're ready to start. And so begin by rotating the club in the direction opposite of how the belt is traveling. I find it helpful if I hold my fingers on the toe of the club to help spin it, while my other hand is on the shaft to provide the pressure. In this picture, you're going to see the head on the left-hand side of the belt, whereas on the previous slide showing a belt sander, the head would have been positioned on the right-hand side. Now, it really doesn't matter, because once you practice and get a feel for it, it's going to become second nature. This is where the ferrule turning fixture is very helpful to assist in holding the ferrule evenly against the belt. It's very, very important to keep the ferrule moving while in contact with the belt in order to prevent the belt from damaging or burning up the ferrule. And if you feel you're going to pause, simply back off. Take the pressure off the club. You want to continue rotating the club until the base of the ferrule is flush with the hosel. And for a professional appearance, the top of the ferrule should not be turned down even with the shaft, but should remain relatively untouched by the belt. Now, once you've successfully turned the ferrule with your belt sander, you may elect to use triple-aught steel wool on the ferrule. You'll just have to use your own judgment if the ferrule needs this extra step upon close inspection of your work. After which, you want to apply acetone to your paper towel or your clean cloth and apply the ferrule in a circular motion, the same direction as the belt. Now, there's some club makers out there that will contend that you want to use an up and down motion, as this is going to result in less acetone lines. Well, we'll let you decide. You can try both methods and see which method you like best. Again, make sure to keep the towel as moist as possible so you get a nice, shiny, smooth ferrule. Our last slide is some helpful hints that have accumulated over the years. Now, I would strongly suggest before ever turning a customer's ferrule, especially with the belt sander, to practice on older clubs first. The belt, especially in the smaller 1x30-inch belt sanders, can quickly remove too much material away from the ferrule if you're not careful, making it cosmetically unacceptable. And you also want to make sure that you can find the 1x30-inch linen belts, as they're not commercially available like the sandpaper-backed belts. And remember, if you make a mistake, the head's going to have to be disassembled and another ferrule reinstalled. And as you can guess, this can be not only costly, but time-consuming. And after the first time you do it, I guarantee you're going to be extra careful in the future. You can also partially finish the ferrule, and that is removing the meat of the ferrule by hand or with the assistance of the belt sander and proceeding with the other assembly steps. Now at the end, then you can do your acetone wipe to restore the shine while you're wiping down the shaft to clean any fingerprints off the club or applying the shaft label onto the shaft. Oh, and one more final note. Don't try to rush it. This is one time you want to take your time and do the job right the very first time. Well, that's a wrap on ferrule finishing. Let's send this back over to Rob, and we can field any questions you might have in the time we have remaining.
All right, great webinar, Jeff. Thank you so much. Folks, if you look on your dashboard, you can see the question box. Feel free to type any questions you may have. And in a second here, Jeff will put up the last slide to show you that this webinar is being recorded and will be on youtube.com/HirikoGolf and on our blog at blog.hirikogolf.com in about an hour. Okay, guys, any questions? Just feel free, type it in there, and we'll get right to it. If not, we can wrap it up. Wait a few moments here. You can also email Jeff at technical@jsummit@hirekogolf.com or call him on his technical support line at 800-942-5872. Well, Jeff, a pretty quiet crowd today.
Yep. I'll probably put him to sleep.
No, it was excellent. A few more moments. If not, then we'll wrap it up. All right, guys. Thanks so much for attending today, and have a great weekend. And that's a wrap. Thanks again, Jeff.
Take care, guys.